Jamal was the kind of student who didn't just enjoy math, he lived for it. Numbers made sense to him in a way the real world often didn't. A quiet 10th grader with sharp eyes and a humble demeanor, Jamal would often stay after class solving extra problems just for fun. But Mrs. Harper, his math teacher, never saw potential when she looked at him. To her, Jamal was just another underachieving kid who'd eventually fall behind like the rest. She rarely called on him in class, assuming he had nothing worth contributing. Her expectations were low, shaped by years of quiet prejudice she'd never questioned. What she didn't know was that Jamal had already been tutoring other students and solving college-level equations in his spare time. He was ready to prove himself, even if she refused to see it. One Monday morning, Mrs. Harper handed out a surprise quiz, 5 questions, all carefully selected to push students to their limits. But when Jamal turned in his paper first, she raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you don't want to double-check your answers?" she asked, her tone laced with doubt. Jamal simply nodded and returned to his seat. The next day, she posted the results. Jamal had scored a perfect 100. Instead of praise, Mrs. Harper looked annoyed. From that day forward, she began assigning Jamal increasingly difficult problems, the kind she usually reserved for mathletes or advanced placement students. It wasn't about challenging him, it was about trying to break him. What Mrs. Harper didn't realize, though, was that every problem she threw his way only sharpened Jamal's resolve. He welcomed the pressure. He was used to it. Weeks passed, and the pattern continued. Every time Jamal aced a challenge, Mrs. Harper upped the difficulty. She began calling on him in class, with questions she hadn't even covered yet advanced calculus concepts far beyond the curriculum. Other students started to notice. Some whispered that Jamal was some kind of genius. Others asked him for help after school, and he always said yes, but Mrs. Harper wasn't convinced. She started implying in front of the class that Jamal's answers were too good, suggesting maybe he had help from the internet or someone at home. Jamal didn't react. He just kept working harder. He spent hours at the library, poring over textbooks and practicing problems online. What Mrs. Harper didn't understand was that Jamal wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to make space for himself in a world that had already tried to shut him out. Every correct answer was a step toward that future. One Friday afternoon, Mrs. Harper made an announcement that sent a ripple through the classroom. The school had been invited to participate in the upcoming state mathematics championship, and one student would be selected to represent their grade. Everyone expected it to be Olivia, a straight-A student who'd won local contests before. But to everyone's surprise, including Jamal's, Mrs. Harper announced that he'd be competing. The class fell silent. Jamal glanced around, unsure if it was a compliment or a setup. Mrs. Harper gave him a thin smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've been doing so well," she said. "Let's see how you handle some real competition." Jamal nodded quietly, knowing full well what she meant. He also knew she hadn't offered to help him prepare no practice materials, no study sessions, nothing. He was on his own. But that weekend, he went to the public library and printed out every past state exam he could find. He watched hours of math lectures online and built his own study plan. He wasn't just going to survive this challenge, he was planning to win it. The day of the state championship arrived, and Jamal showed up in his best button-down shirt, clutching a worn notebook filled with formulas and scribbles. The competition hall was packed, hundreds of students, most from elite prep schools with private tutors and parents cheering from the sidelines. Jamal stood alone, calm on the outside but with a storm of nerves churning in his stomach. When the first round began, he took a deep breath and focused. Problem after problem, he worked methodically, checking and double-checking his calculations. Hours passed, and the list of participants grew smaller with each round. By the finals, only Jamal and 2 others remained. The final question was brute alone that hadn't been solved in under 20 minutes in previous years. Jamal solved it in 12. When his name was announced as the state champion, the room exploded with applause. Back at school the next morning, Mrs. Harper didn't meet his eyes, but the students did. For the first time, they looked at Jamal not with surprise, but with respect. That afternoon, as the final bell rang and students rushed out, Mrs. Harper asked Jamal to stay behind. The classroom felt unusually quiet. She sat at her desk, hands folded, eyes lowered for a moment before she finally looked up. "Jamal," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it, "I owe you an apology." Jamal didn't say a word, he just listened. "I misjudged you," she continued. "Not because of your work ethic or your intelligence, but because of my own biases. I thought I was being fair, but I wasn't. I let my assumptions cloud what was right in front of me." For the first time, she looked genuinely remorseful. "You didn't just win that championship, you taught me something I should have learned a long time ago." Jamal stood still for a moment, processing her words. Then he nodded, not out of acceptance, but acknowledgement. Change, he knew, didn't happen overnight, but this was a start. As Jamal walked home that evening, championship medals still tucked into his backpack, the weight of the moment began to settle in. Not the weight of the win, but the shift it had created, subtle but real. He passed the corner store, where kids used to mock him for carrying math books, and this time, a younger boy waved and said, "You're the math champ, right?" Jamal smiled. For the first time, it felt like he wasn't just proving something for himself, he was opening doors for others, too. At dinner, his mum hugged him tighter than usual, tears welling up as she whispered, "I always knew." The next day at school, a group of students crowded around his locker, asking for tips, not teasing. Mrs. Harper greeted him with a nod. Her expression changed, not just respectful, but different. Jamal knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be bias to face, challenges to overcome. But now, he had a voice, a name, a story that others could follow. And that, to him, was the real victory.